Welcome to the Marathon Investigation Podcast, where we discuss and debate the latest news regarding course cutters, bandits, and bib mules.
Welcome to the Marathon Investigation Podcast. I'm Derek Murphy, owner of Marathon Investigation, along with Scott Coomer.
Hey, everybody.
Tonight we have Kit Fox. Kit is with Runner's World. He's been there. He was with Runner's World a few years back, and he did the initial profile on Marathon Investigation on the Boston cheating project that kind of started the site, really, from being a blog where I was anonymous to kind of being out there in the open. So Kit did that first story, and so I've been working with him on that and many other stories for the years. He was at Runner's World then, left for a short time, and now he's back. Welcome, Kit Fox.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate kind of turning the tables on you after the last podcast we did. You interviewed me. Maybe we'll talk about that one too. So, but anyhow.
Exactly, yeah.
So yeah,
I feel like we're in like Freaky Friday, like we've switched.
Yeah. I'm in the position of power. Well, not really, but
I know I'm a little nervous.
So yeah, let me start out. Why?
One other thing I just wanted to add to bring it full circle.
Yes.
I actually was interviewed by, I want to say, Runner's World UK about how much I thought that the Marathon Investigation was bad. So that kind of and me and Derek had like a 2-hour argument about it. So that kind of brings everything full circle.
I love it. Yeah, it's kind of it's like the Justice League assembling, I guess, right?
Exactly.
We've got all the points of view.
Yeah, exactly. So real quick, just kind of tell everyone what you're doing with Runner's World now.
Yeah, so you sort of mentioned my history a little bit. So I started at Runner's World 2015. I was a reporter there, writer, became an editor, left in what I call my sabbatical, and worked for a couple other publications. And now I'm back. I'm the special projects editor, which is a really fun title, the most fun title I've ever had, actually. And so I do just a lot of our longer term or sort of bigger projects, things we're talking about like membership and, thinking about, things we can do in the future that are, maybe outside of the print or digital sphere, outside of like what traditionally Runner's World has been. So that's kind of my role. I get to be creative and think of big ideas.
Very cool. So I'm going to start out by asking you, why is Runner's World pro-bandit?
Oh boy!
I say that tongue firmly in cheek. I don't want to put you on the spot.
We are not pro bandit, as that article mentions right off the bat. We are not pro bandit. Like briefly again, and I'm not speaking for the writer Amanda or even the brand here, but that article mentions the reality that people do bandit, and sort of, I guess, it just like kind of questions. I shouldn't say questions, but kind of talks about like, how big is the crime, and if you do it, again, as it was presented, how to do it best. But we are not pro bandit in any mean or by any means. It was just. An article we decided to do. So
I know. I said that was kind of tongue in cheek.
Right off the bat,
Okay, I just want to get that out of the way. But no, we talked to and I talked to Bart a little bit about it, and and I've gone back and forth with Jeff Dengate on Twitter, and I hope to have him on. I think it's a it's a good debate, and I never really felt that they were pro bandit. Along with a lot of other people, I think it. Based on the readership, I worry it might miss the mark with some people and give the wrong impression, or maybe give somebody looking for an excuse to do it may kind of make them think it's okay. So that's kind of my point of view. But
it's not okay. Don't bandit. And I imagine that you have a lot of bandits that listen to your podcast, and I'm speaking directly to them. Please don't bandit races.
All right, there we go. I got that from Kit Fox. Kit Fox says don't bandit races. So, okay, so we'll move on. I had to start with that. I just had to. So that's
sure.
Payback for the Gia podcast. Actually, that wasn't that bad. I've softened on her, and we may touch on that a little bit.
Yes.
So the way Kit and I first became acquainted was actually how did you first hear about Marathon Investigation, because you got a hold of me. I didn't reach to you, despite what Let's Run people think I'm a publicity whore and that I was seeking out any attention. That's not how it went down.
Not at all, actually. Yeah, so we had, and I'm trying to remember initially how we found out about it. It could have been through Twitter, but it was around the New York City Marathon, and it was Jonathan Kane, who's a running coach in New York City. And he had found someone who was like selling, I think it was New York City Marathon medals on eBay. And he'd like been able to identify that person. So I reached out, kind of intrigued by his process, and it came out that he was sort of, doing exactly what you're doing. But he was very self-interested in the athletes that he was coaching who were being robbed of age group awards. So that's why he would kind of investigate results. And so that whole idea of, someone spending their free time investigating marathon cheaters just really intrigued me. So we actually went out and profiled him, but he initially mentioned this super secret Facebook group.
Yes.
Dedicated to rooting out Boston marathon cheaters, and my journalism sirens just went off. I was like, oh, man, I want to talk to as many people that are in this secret Facebook group as possible, figure out what sort of secret handshakes they need for me to infiltrate. I'm half kidding, but I did talk to Jonathan about, reaching out to people just to talk to as many people as possible. And you were the first person that he mentioned, because I think you formed that group, correct?
No, absolutely not.
You didn't. Okay.
I was very hesitant and kind of hop in there. It was formed in this group. There's a Facebook group that was basically an offshoot of Let's Run, because when Let's Run, it was.
How come I'm not in this group?
No way. Well, it's nothing. It's not basically. You don't want to be in it now. There's nothing. It's dead. But yeah. So basically, what it was an offshoot of Let's Run, because you couldn't discuss them. It was about Mike. It was during the Mike Rossi thing. So it was mostly people who were hyper invested in the Mike Rossi situation, and so they created that. And so I joined that one reluctantly. Again, I didn't have much to say about Mike Rossi at that point. There wasn't much more to say beyond the wedding disc jockey wars and whatnot. And so I was in that one. And if you remember, Kit, remember the other is the arch enemy of Mike Rossi, Ken.
Yes.
Who's no longer with us. He passed away. But he was, he kind of started taking over that group, and he had some just far out theories, and and he was trying to, I forget, he thought somebody had muled Mike's bib, and he found out who this guy was, and he was gonna go to his church and confront him, and the guy, he had nothing to do with it. So, and it was stuff like that, and he was really kind of going off the wall. So we broke off from that original group that was, I don't know if it was founded by Ken, but he was one of the main guys, and then somebody else created that, and it splintered, and it became less about Mike Rossi, more about, hey, just race cheat investigation. Let's find, anything comes up. So so that's what it became, and I was just kind of along for the ride at that point. The blog was what it was, pretty much an individual blog at that point. So
can I ask a question? Prior to Derek and the Marathon Investigation coming on your radar screen, do you remember any other time in your career, or do you know of any other time in the history of runner's world where these issues would pop up or be, written about, or anyone was interested in them? Is marathon cheating been a long and storied issue?
So I want to say yes and no. It had never, I think there have been a couple historic, I shouldn't say historic, but articles in our archives that had briefly mentioned some cases, but it was, there was never that full feature. You think of the New Yorker feature, and I'm blanking on his name, on the dentist.
Kip Litton.
Yes, exactly. That was always kind of the man, that article should have been in Runner's World. Sort of thought, but we had never really looked for or tried to write an article about marathon cheating, just because, in our eyes, it sort of went under the radar and wasn't as high profile until Mike Rossi. You had such, sort of the, every now and then a story would pop up. But for us, there was the discussions were twofold. One we were fascinated with why someone would do this, and sort of just the psychology and hearing, honestly asking them the questions like why do this? What compels you to want to cheat in a marathon? So that was number one, and getting someone on the record was very difficult, as Derek well knows. So we hadn't been able to, get someone on the record. So we had sort of avoided doing a story that way. But then once we found out about, Derek and kind of these people who made it their mission to catch cheaters, that became a story. And that was new because of social media and because of backlinks. You could actually investigate people. And so that more became the story and more became what I became interested in was, Derek's process. And, honestly, Derek, we talked about this too, but like the ethics behind what you do and who you choose to, I don't want to say expose, but who you choose to write about, who you choose to keep anonymous. So that became really my interest at that point.
Yeah, and I was still kind of developing that because when you first contacted me, the blog was marathoncheat.blogspot.com. It wasn't Marathon Investigation. Yeah. My name wasn't tied to it. I made, it was anonymous. I'm like, all right, well, if I'm going to be doing this, I need to, I realized I needed to, be public and be out there and, not, because again, I wasn't really, up until just before your article, no one really knew who I was. I was pretty much writing to myself and probably some people from Let's Run. I would share it on Reddit and stuff, and and pretty much I would name anybody I found, but nobody was looking at the articles. And that changed. Really, it was like kind of a two-part process, because if you remember, before, kind of jumping ahead, but before your article came out, it was like the week or two before was the Gia Alvarez, story.
Yeah.
And we knew about it. You knew about Gia. We both knew about it, but that we weren't writing about it because the story, your story was coming up, and there wasn't much to write about at that point until she went public about her being banned from Boston. But we can kind of shoot back. So so Kit reached out to me. I didn't reach out to Kit. I was, kind of the whole point. But he reached out to me when I was already, and I'd kind of started the whole what I call the Boston Project, where basically what I wanted to do was to get Boston's attention that, hey, this is an issue. It was be able to come up with a list of runners that, hey, 50 people or these 100 people we caught that cheated to get into Boston. And so that was kind of the goal of that. Or we'd find out, hey, we can't find anybody, so does it really matter if people are cheating for Boston qualifying times or they're not using them to get into Boston? So that was kind of my initial thought. And so I had started the project. Other people were helping me investigate. Interest kind of waned, and I was kind of at a standstill until then Kit reached me and kind of reinvigorated my desire to keep researching and kind of get beyond my 25 or so I had initially. Say, okay, I need to, if I want to make an impact, I got to, find everybody I can. And then, and then really Kit was, everybody I found, Kit, you guys did your research too, and we had arguments over, okay, do we include this person, or not, and we'd go back and forth.
And we actually, our numbers differed too because of our standards were slightly different than yours. Not saying that you were incorrect, we just needed, more sourcing and kind of more proof in order to include the number. And again, we also made the decision not to disclose any names unless they were public. So I think we mentioned Gia because she had publicly came out at that point. Because you go back into ethics and Scott, as you argued with Derek in your podcast, our whole mission here wasn't to out anyone, and we had a lot of discussions about that as well. It was more to say, a couple things. One, it showed, because there's so much kind of mystique around Boston and things like that. It just showed that this was occurring, and it was, compared to the field, it is a relatively small number of people that get in through cheating, but it is something that people were surprised when our number came out. I'm looking at this now. We had 47 runners that we could confidently say got into Boston in 2014 by dubious means, shall we say. So, when we finally confirmed that number, I think a lot of people were pretty shocked.
Yeah, and I had to keep on pointing out that, hey, I didn't look at everybody. That was kind of that's a big source. Like, hey, I prioritized, and boy, do I still get grief from the process that I used to prioritize runners, because basically it's runners who finished Boston significantly slower than they qualified. It's a little more detailed than that, but that's it. Then I would hear people would preemptively email me or say, don't call me a cheater because I ran slow, and that wasn't the case. But yeah, so basically I took the runners that had the largest percent variance and looked at them. So I think I looked at maybe, I can't remember now if it was the 2,000 runners I looked at or whatever, or up to a certain variance, or whatever that was, just to kind of get a piece. And I think I estimated, okay, I found 50 some, or I think I'm saying it was like 70 by the time, as time went on. But, I thought maybe 300 to 400 in total, cheat if I had to estimate and extrapolate out.
And just to dig into a little bit more of the process, because I thought it was fascinating when you showed us your charts and things like that. But you basically looked at, and a lot of people don't know this, or at least before, I didn't even know this until you pointed this out to me, but bib numbers at Boston are based off of your qualifying time, which is great for people who love data like you, because you can basically identify to the 2 to 5 seconds what time they qualified in, right?
Yep.
And so then you can tell, okay, compared to their qualifying time, how was their Boston finish? And then I think it was an hour variance was when you flagged someone. And again, that was when you were getting grief. They weren't suspicious at that point because it's a marathon and, so much can happen in a marathon. It was just like that just narrowed the field down from 30,000 to, 2,000 or whatever it was. And then from there, I think you started going through the largest variances and then working your way down. And I remember just so many Excel spreadsheets of names and times and things. And we would basically, we sort of worked together, but, me and a couple reporters took it upon ourselves to, individually verify. Like if you flag someone as like definitely cheating, we tried to like not look at your information and figure it out ourselves through Facebook, through Athlinks and things like that. And then for me, the most kind of challenging and interesting part of the project was, my whole goal was to get, I just wanted one person on the record who was willing to talk to me about why they did it. And so we started contacting all of them. And it was fascinating. And so I think I'm looking back here. I think we only got one person. We kept their name out of the story, but I only got one person to admit to me that they cheated.
Did they tell you why and all that?
Yeah, they did. It was a very interesting conversation with this person, because it started out as typically all these conversations would, where we would talk about their qualifying time and the race. And then I would say, like, your splits in some of these photos and things are quite suspicious. In this person's case, I actually was able to find, and they didn't know this, but their Garmin data was public. So I literally found the race that they had run, and you can see where they cut the course by their own Garmin data that was uploaded to the internet. So they were giving me a bunch of it, sort of excuses about why their splits might be off. They may have missed a mat or whatever, until I said, like, I have your Garmin data in front of me and I can see it. And then that's when the switch sort of flipped. And they, it was a person whose sibling had qualified for Boston, and it was their dream to run Boston together. And this person, they say that they were in shape to qualify and just were not having a great race. It was their last chance to qualify. And so they hopped into a porta potty at like mile 21. It was at like an appendage at the race they were at. Sort of like interesting, because you're looking at Honolulu now, Derek. But it was kind of like that.
Yep.
sorting out and back. So they hopped into the porta potty, waited for a few seconds, hopped out, and just went the opposite direction. And then as soon as they were caught, I mean, it got kind of like a really interesting, deep conversation about how remorseful they were, and that they just wanted to have that experience with their sister. So it was, yeah. It ranged from that, which, again, part of that was like, that's why we didn't want to name anyone, because Derek, I think your ethics evolved.
Oh yeah.
Pretty far, but it was like, we were not out to ruin anyone's lives here. I just wanted to know why. And so that's why we decided not to name, anyone in the article, but I did feel like I got a good sense, at least in that case, on the why. But I think that there's a variance as well. I think because Boston is so hard to get into, and people have their differing motivations to finish it, sometimes they just do it because they want that one experience. And then other times there's, other extraneous issues involved, and they, maybe, I don't know, have like egotistical ambitions, or they want the Instagram likes. In this case, the person that talked to me, I don't feel like that was the case.
Yeah, you don't feel that wasn't like a serial case. Like, I mean, and you definitely, there was cases where you found more than what I found, and really kind of the stuff that you caught, kind of helped me going forward, like the Strava data. I think that's probably the first, whether it was, Garmin Connector, Strava, whatever it was on. Yeah. I think that was probably the first case. I'm like, oh yeah, definitely, I need to look for that every time now. I think that was the first, that I knew, of that. And then there were more, some of the serial cheats. This name's out there, the Donnellys. I mean, I think you discovered a couple pieces on that I didn't, that I hadn't caught. I mean, I found him initially, but, then it turns out, then you find more and more races, and okay, hey, this is a serial cheater. And then with the race in France, and I've written about Planet Tour so many times, and I can't believe they're still kind of doing their thing. But again, to people listening, there's, when I was going through, my prioritized list, I was coming across all these runners who from Mount Saint Michel marathon, small marathon in France. I'm like, why? It's really odd that I'm getting so many, and like I can't find them. It doesn't make sense. And then looking at finish video, they weren't in the video and whatnot. And so, you guys did a lot of the research on the back end that kind of, I knew basically what happened, but I didn't know why, didn't quite know why.
Yeah, we were kind of able to leverage our connections with that race and sort of talk to some race officials about what was going on there, which was, in that sort of situation, you kind of feel bad because it's, this company's selling people on the fact that they can run the Boston Marathon, and the people buying the bibs, or at least most of them, I think some of them may know what's going on, but most of them just think that they can, buy the, tour to Boston and go run, and in the back end, in order to like make the sale, the company has to, figure out how to get them a bib, so that they partnered with this race to sort of forge results.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I do think, in most of those cases, the people, they thought they were just making a transaction. I think that was the quote the one runner had, where, media in France kind of took it over and, and fully outed on, who the travel agency was and the details. And because that is and I wasn't aware at the time, but there is an international travel program where runners from abroad can purchase bibs from travel agents. So there are authorized agencies that Boston deals with. This wasn't one of them. Then the next year or 2 years later, where I found, where we saw the owner of the travel agency going across the finish line himself carrying bibs. So it was just, so that was a crazy one. So a lot of those, I probably wouldn't have gotten quite as far if it wasn't for you guys working alongside and kind of doing your own research. There may have been I had the cheaters, but as far as that full story, I wouldn't have known.
And I guess for us, the most interesting part of at least for me personally, part of the most interesting part of this project was just to show how social media and the internet both, I think, has contributed to people cheating at marathons, but also like the shocking amount of information you can piece together, and catch them. I think it was very much easier to cheat in a marathon 20 years ago than it is now.
Yeah, no doubt. No timing mats and no social media to out yourself. I mean, now since your initial article and then just all the, kind of steamroll and, and there are other, things, the G article, which was right before yours. So, and then, all the other attention. I mean, I get all kinds of tips, and usually the tips are from friends of these people who cheated. It's like, hey, this person's bragging about this time. I know they can't possibly do that. So I get so many tips from acquaintances and friends, and they're in running clubs or just, whatever. I mean, people out themselves, practically every case that I write about, if it's not just me going through results, I'm looking for intent. So usually, if I find somebody with missed splits, I'm not going to write about them necessarily. But if I find about missed splits and then I see them holding up the medal on Facebook and, bragging about it, or they're sponsored or they're ambassadors or whatever. The social media. So, I agree. It plays a big part, I think, both in the motivation and in, getting them caught.
Well, and also I think there's a lot more smaller marathons. I mean, 10, 20 years ago, there was just major marathons and not that many of them. Now, almost every town in America has a marathon, and the smaller they are and the less timing mats and the less someone suspects it, the easier it is to slip by and cheat.
Yeah, but at the same time, Athlinks, which is like invaluable for what Derek does, even with those smaller marathons with a few timing mats, fewer timing mats, you can quite quickly look at Athlinks' history and, at least to start, sort of become suspicious at a time. For us, that was never that was never enough. We needed 100% proof through timing splits and photos and things like that. But Athlinks was, invaluable.
Yeah, and I think we agreed on that. I would never say just based on the time.
Yeah. I'm not. Yeah, what you uncovered, I think was rigorous as well.
But
I think that in this process, and because you have done this since, in this process, our like standard as well was just that we had to reach out to everyone that we identified, whether or not they wanted to comment, and many did not. We at least reached out in order to come to our number.
Got it. Yeah, and I think some of the ones we varied on. I remember one in particular that we just completely disagreed on. Like, there's this guy had to cheat, but it's like the course. It was a small. I just want to say it might have been like the Canton Marathon or something, but it was a small marathon. I think you talked to the race director. I think, I probably did. The split seemed impossible, but we couldn't figure out how he possibly could have cut that section of the course.
Yeah.
And he was out of your number. He wasn't one, and you didn't have the outing limit. He was out of your number. I remember next spring or whatever, it was rock and roll in Tennessee, Music City, whatever it was, and he obviously cut and he was disqualified. I'm like, I knew it. I knew it. And I remember emailing you and said, hey, remember this guy? Yeah. Here's his most recent result. We were I was right on that one. So it's just one of the things like, okay, in the case we're highly suspicious, just kind of flag him, keep him in my little database that I'll cross-reference results on, and if his name pops up, first thing I do when I get people emailing me about stuff like that is I check my email history for that name and see if it popped up before. And I have a list of, now it's probably about 1,000 some runners that that I'll cross. If I pull 4 results down, I'm going to cross-reference against that list. Say, okay, hey, this person had a suspicious result. Let me look more deeply. So,
well, and I have to say, like, because I learned a lot through the process and became a lot more cautious. Because I'll tell you this story real quick. Derek, I think you may have known this, maybe you didn't, but one of the worst mistakes I've made in my professional career was,
I think I know what you're
we Derek and I had identified someone we thought was a bib mule, which, I guess people who listen to podcasts know that, but a faster runner carries someone else's bib. And the way to do that with most races is you see identical splits throughout the entire course. And then you look at race photos, and you see if, those runners are running directly together. And if they're not, usually that means that one of the runners is carrying the bib. And then you can look at social media and see if they're friends on social media and if they interact. Anyway, so we had found what both of us thought was just the most cut and dry bib mule. It was a race where literally to like the 10th of a second, these two runners had the same splits. Only one runner appeared at the finish line, and there was like a big gap. Like the photo that was taken was really kind of wide angle, and there was no other runners in it. So to me, that was very clear. So I was able to contact the runner that I thought had given his bib to the other runner to chat and see, if he would tell me that he gave his bib or whatever. And in our conversation became very, very heated naturally because I'm calling and saying that he didn't run a race that he did. And so it turns out, in these smaller marathons, like a marathon photo or whatever will like automatically sort your bib number and you can search by bib number. This race was they just uploaded a bunch of photos and then you had to click through and order all these photos. And they were sort of disorganized, and I thought that they were in order, but if you keep clicking through, maybe like 10 photos after this finish line photo where it looks like only one person is, you'll see like very far off to the side this other runner, who is the guy that both Derek and I were confident, was the bib mule. And anyway, we were totally incorrect, and I can't, I still like every now and then think back and get really uncomfortable thinking about what I could put that guy through on the phone call because I was accusing him of cheating and he did not. And so, we did not include him in our final number because we caught it. I went back and was able to figure out, okay, he didn't, he obviously didn't cheat, but it just shows kind of the stakes and it goes into the ethics as well. This can ruin people's professional lives, and sometimes personal lives as well if they're accused of cheating. And also, like, it just shows, part of your, the ethics that you wrestle with, Derek, every day is how big of a deal is this in the grand scheme of things? And on like one end, like it is a very big deal because, you may be taking a spot from Boston, but on the other end, it's like, running is supposed to be encouraging and we're all supposed to just be like getting better. And at the end of the day, like, is bib muling the worst thing in the world? So that like really hit home when I got this person wrong and I confronted them and I was very wrong about it.
Yeah, and when you told me about that one, that shook me too. I'm like, man, and that made me rethink. I mean, he never would have been one that I was going to call out individually anyhow, but he could have been, if there were some other circumstances that would have made me want to write about this guy. But yeah, so that was probably like I get asked about that. Hey, did you ever get one wrong? Again, that was probably the closest, where I could say that, yeah, I thought this guy cheated, but he didn't. There's, but again, I don't think I would have written about him individually or named him because it.
Yeah, no, yeah.
But again, if there was some kind of other reason that would have driven me to it, it could have gone there. The other was a story where I reported a runner to a race director. The splits were incorrect, but what happened is it was a timing issue, and the timer had filled in the gaps and gave, just randomly pretty much. And so the race director called this person a cheater, and she almost got pulled from Boston. So while I was correct and the result wasn't accurate, it wasn't because you cheated. It's because there was a timing mix-up, and the timer and the RD weren't communicating. So those were kind of like the two closest calls to made me step back.
Well, let me ask you this question that we asked Derek when I got in my famous argument with him, and that's that as a writer and as an editor, and you're doing these stories and you're naming people's names only under certain circumstances. Do you stop and think before you hit send or before you decide that you're going to publish this person's name about the effects that this could have on the person? Because one of the things that seems to stand out about the stereotypical cheater, like when I've seen now 20, 30 different cases of cheating, is they tend to be extreme social media people. They seem to have a lot of narcissism. They seem to self-identify with their achievements and performances and their social media attention more than the average person. And that when they get outed, you take all of that away from them and you kind of hurt them at the same time. Do you ever worry, like, how am I going to feel if I get if I see in the news tomorrow that, Mike Rossi hung himself in in his bedroom last night? Like, do you weigh that on your mind?
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, to take a step back, so we decided, like, fairly early on in this Boston story that, as an editorial policy, we weren't going to name anyone unless they had already publicly admitted it, on their own blog or whatever. And that was part of the reason why was, what is our role in this process? And for us, it was kind of twofold. It was to show that this is a trend. This is something that happens. It was to tell the story of Derek, because, it's news and it's interesting. And it was to kind of try and get, into the psyche a little bit of someone who would decide to do this. And that's why, we were trying to contact people. And part of when we contacted people, and we mentioned this, I mentioned this in the article, like in order to get them to talk and make them more comfortable to talk, we said that as a policy, we're not going to name you. I literally just want to ask you some questions about why you decided to do this. So yeah, we put in a lot of thought about, what our sort of ethics were going to be around this story and how we would approach, naming or not naming people. And we landed on, we aren't going to name people because we thought that the trend as a whole was more interesting. And we also thought that Derek's, process and his algorithms and things were more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
And I also, not just more interesting, I should say, but I don't know. We just felt that kind of responsibility that we aren't, and again, this is what, and this actually kind of transitions a little bit into the podcast we did with Derek, which was like the next transition into this, where we went into a lot more about the ethics and a little bit more about kind of the real world repercussions, which is where we went and interviewed Gia Alvarez on the record about what happened to her after that whole thing happened. And, these are, what I guess we've learned and realized is just kind of the, on both sides, the mob mentality of social media. And we just wanted to share the story of when you admit to cheating or are accused of cheating, here's what happens to you. And that was the reason why we approached Gia and chatted with her about that.
Yeah, and I re-listened to that one not too long ago. I know initially I was like, at first I didn't, and then maybe you didn't, even when you talked to me, I didn't know Gio was going to be the one that you got. I know you were trying to talk to somebody. There was another runner that we were, runner that I had written about initially that I actually, again, he obviously cheated, but but again, kind of saw the impact it was having, and so I kind of backed off on naming him and whatnot. And you were trying to talk to him, and so I didn't know that Gia, until right before it got published that Gia was going to be the source of that. And so that was very. It was interesting, and again, still, it enlightened. And I think I've, over the years, I kind of softened on everything. I've advocated that, if Boston wants to let Gia in, I don't have any issue with that at this point. We'll go from talking to Gia again, and if, for anybody who doesn't know, Gia Alvarez, and that was kind of the first story I wrote that got any attention outside of just being on the blog, where she had qualified for Boston legitimately. She was unable to run, I believe, because she was pregnant, and she gave her bib to a friend. Her friend ran a qualifying time under Gia's name, and so then the following year, Gia used her friend's time to enter herself into Boston. She had a very popular blog. One of her followers noticed that she got into Boston with a qualifying time, knew that she hadn't been running, and reported her to me and to the BAA, and BAA ended up issuing her a lifetime ban. And so initially Gia had apologized for saying she was banned for giving her bib away. The article I wrote said, well, no, you were banned because you used your friend's time in Tender Boston. So that's really, and funny, I didn't even know how popular she was. I didn't expect anything from that article more than what any prior article was. But so I was very, surprised by that. By that feedback, and I think I talked to Bart. I mean, Bart Yasso retweeted it. I'm like, wow, I'm big time now, and so it's like, so it was. So that was kind of a wake up call to say, wow, I really do have an audience. And then knowing when your article was coming out, I knew I'd have more. So so it really, maybe it shouldn't matter how many people I was talking to as far as where I lie, but it was kind of a learning process for me. It still evolves every now and then. It's like, okay, I'm keeping the name out of this, but sometimes it doesn't matter. Jane Seow, I didn't mention her name in the first article, but it was, people were able to find it, and they found out she went to Harvard, and she wrote for Huffington Post, and for those reasons, her story went viral. Not so much the everything else. So I've kind of learned, and I'm much more conservative now than I probably was initially, than I probably should have been initially. So.
Scott, I'm curious, is your obviously your view on Derek has softened. Has your view on what he does softened at all?
Well, I think that one of the things that we resolved when we had our podcast together was that it's not necessarily Derek and what he does that is the biggest evil of them all. It's the way that the public responds to it and the social media pylon, that I think that in a lot of cases, for example, like Mike Rossi, here's this guy, he's out, self-promoting himself. He's out in social media. He's talking about, he's got this moral indignation. There's this hubris. And then it turns out that he cheated. And then there's articles about him. The fact that Derek might write an article that says, this guy cheated at with the Lehigh, whatever, marathon, that in and of itself isn't the thing that drives me nuts as much as the 43,000 people that share it and talk about how this guy has done the worst possible thing in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That at the end of the day, I think that social media, or I think public shaming is probably a bigger societal problem than marathon cheating, and I don't know what the fix is to that. And I think that that's something that we're kind of exploring together as well,
Yeah, that's interesting, because and we as like a journalistic institution are caught in the middle of that too, in talking about what is a story and what is not, what is true and what is not. Because again, we're looking for what's news and what's factual. We aren't necessarily taking a stand or trying to enact policy or things like that. So that was definitely conversations that we had.
Right. And I guess, if the guy who wins the marathon or the guy who, is the last person to qualify for Boston or something, if that's a story in and of itself and there's a cheating aspect, okay. But if you find out that runner number, 27,438 cheated and he really should have been runner number 32,450, and then Runner's World does like a big article about it and then the whole world turns against this guy, did he do something wrong? Yes. Was the public shaming a good? No. And does it matter? Because it's not news that, this guy cheated and he really would have been much further down in the bottom of the pack than he was. Mm-hmm. And then if that guy's whole life is ruined over it, then I kind of turn around and I say, well, why did that article need to be written, Yeah.
And it's just so to be clear, we actually haven't named anyone. There's actually only two instances, or actually maybe one that I can think of, where we named someone that nobody else had named. And this is one of the most famous articles runners have ever written. But when we caught Paul Ryan lying about his marathon time, back when he was running, and he was on the vice presidential ticket in 2008. But other than that, unless it's public, they've either admitted it or, like the Mike Rossi situation, it's kind of out in the public domain. We haven't, done any sort of expose.
Robbie Young, how early on that were you on that with your? Because I know we talked about Robbie Young before you wrote an article. You wrote the article. I think it was just starting to pick up traction on Let's Run at that point when you wrote an article about those suspicions, I think.
I caught that the morning after the Let's Run post came on. I should mention that I try not to spend my free time on the Let's Run forums, but for some reason...
Okay, what is your username on Let's Run? You're probably
For some reason, I found myself on the forums, or I can't remember. I don't want to take credit for saying that because it could have been a colleague who sent it over. But we saw that initial thread the morning that it happened. And the other thing was, I think, so that goes into another thing with, I started writing a little bit about people going for Transamerica records, and we would get a lot of pitches for people that are going for these records, and for a little while we would write about a lot of them because it is a great story. It's really cool. Oftentimes they're doing it for a really good cause. But what we found was that people were pitching us their stories, and they just weren't finishing. They would start, they maybe have been looking for sponsors or something like that. They weren't cheating, of course, but they needed like a hook in order to draw in people to donate money to whatever charity or whatever, they were doing, so that they would send us and let us know that they were doing this, and then we would write about it, and then they would quit like a third of the way through. So sort of my own, this was never like an official policy, but my own sort of radar was you had to be halfway before, you'd be more than halfway across the country on pace for the record before we would write about you. And that sort of reached its point when Rob Young was going. So we knew about what he was trying to do beforehand and chose not to write about it, not because we were suspicious at all. Just because we wanted to see, like, is he the real deal or is he going to drop out? And then that whole thing happened. So I remember contacting he was a student at the time, and I forget if it was like Kansas or something who actually caught it. So I reached out and
Asher.
Yeah. I interviewed him, and sort of learned about what he saw. And then I was able to reach Rob Young and and now I'm blanking on the name, but kind of his manager who was on the RV, right. The infamous RV. And I spoke to them. I don't think it was that same day. It was maybe a day or two after, and things have been building and building. And I spoke to Rob Young for maybe 45 minutes. And then we went live with our article after that. And it's just a very interesting scenario when overwhelming evidence is presented to you and you continue to deny. It's kind of
and he still does. There was an interesting piece. I think it was a short on ESPN or whatever with another theory, which I didn't quite buy. I don't know if you saw that one where they basically concluded, or they thought that Rob was riding on the outside on the back of the RV without the people driving knowing it. So I think that was kind of, to me, that sounded convenient for the people driving it to kind of get away from the
sure.
the scrutiny. That whole thing was fascinating, and it kind of Let's Run, and that's kind of part of what I dislike about it. It's kind of the bull in the china shop, because even before that thread started, that's when Laz and from the Ultra List, they were planning on intercepting him, meeting him, and observing him before he knew there was any suspicion. I would have much rather seen them out there being able to observe without him knowing he was under suspicion. Then there would have been no doubt. I mean, if you had Lazarus, Gary and all those people witnessed him, we would have known. Once you out somebody on Let's Run, you lose that element of surprise.
Yeah, and look, that was a case where, again, we weren't the ones,
No.
With that first story, but you go into kind of the ethics of it. He's a public figure, and his kind of central role is, his running and his charities. And so, when it comes to light that he allegedly is not running the whole way across this trip where he's got corporate sponsors and things like that, we're going to name him. And I also, as part of that, interviewed even before the final report came out, because we did a follow-up story when that final report came out. But before that, I interviewed the CEO of Skens, who, the whole kind of, I get, maybe, is it irony? Anyway, it was very interesting because the CEO of Skins is an activist in terms of clean sport, particularly with doping. But that's kind of why he took extraordinary measures that probably cost him, a heck of a lot of money to basically prove that Rob Young was not running the whole way. But it was just very, very interesting to me that was the sponsor that Rob Young went with, and it ended up basically becoming his downfall.
Has Rob Young ever come out and talked about this?
He's never admitted it. I re-interviewed him after the just some backstory for people that don't know. So we did our initial article and a few follow-up, because after I interviewed him, our article came out. He continued his way across the country, and then that's when Laz and his band of merry elderly
the geezers
tailed him, and they actually became like sort of friends with him and talked with him, and they didn't catch any wrongdoing because he knew he was being watched, so he was actually trying to put in the miles, and after several days couldn't keep up with it and had to drop out.
Yeah, once they were there, then his pace dropped severely. Well, it stopped once he got caught by Asher. I hope I had the name right. Once that became public, then all of a sudden his pace went down and continued, until he got injured.
And he dropped out. Anyway, so that dropped out and sort of like quieted for a while. But again, because the Skin CEO was so determined to like either defend him or not be associated with him at all, because that whole company's mission is clean sport. They hired a couple experts, Ross Tucker and Robert Pielke from CU, to investigate him. And when we looked at that report, it was there's pretty substantial evidence. So I reached back out to Rob Young and his manager, and I believe I was able to talk to both of them, and they both denied it, even after this report came out.
So no one's ever said that there was cheating. No one's ever admitted.
No,
I think that maybe it was Dustin, I think his name was, the one manager, kind of put out the theory that, hey, maybe Rob was hanging on the back of the RV because he put a curtain back there. We couldn't see what he was doing right behind the RV, so maybe he was doing it without our knowledge. So that was the kind of closest from anybody internally that I know saying that, yeah, maybe he didn't run all those miles, but while trying to keep themselves, hey, he did that without us knowing, kind of thing. So
it was interesting to me because I knew a lot of people in the ultra community that were friends with him, and all of them stuck up for him and said he's a really good guy and he has a really good cause and he really believes in his cause. And all the people that I knew that had firsthand, contact with him all raved about what a great guy he was.
Well, I mean, if you're a con artist, you're good at that stuff. I mean, I had the same thing I'd written about the triathlete, the Wish runner. He was trying to break a record for the most half triathlons in a year. He cheated on the first one, and then looked at the fundraising. It was hey, I'm supporting Make-A-Wish. Well, 80% or more was going to support him doing the race. The scraps were going to Make-A-Wish or whatnot. So yeah, and everyone, most, everybody except for the people who he had scammed over the years were, yeah, wonderful guy, great guy. Why are you going against him? It's for the children, kind of thing. And yeah, that's kind of a comment.
And again, our job, back to like Runner's World, isn't to prove whether or not he's a good guy or a bad guy, whether the cause is just or not. It was just simply there is someone going for a newsworthy record. If accomplished, it would be great news. And I guess it was like a year after I covered Pete Kostelnik's very legitimate record. he accomplished, and that was very newsworthy and amazing. So like we weren't trying to determine how good of a guy he was, or how or even like how malicious like his cheating was. We were just like, this is newsworthy, and this is happening, and we want to see if it's legitimate or not.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, it's a funny thing, I think we talked about this. I think this came out like right the day we were recording the podcast, because maybe he called me afterwards and we talked about Rob Young, and I had just had heard about him. But I think you had planned your interview with him before these cheating allegations came, so you were going to talk to him, regardless. Yes. And you weren't talking to him about cheating, but then you found out about it.
You're reminding me, yeah. I had it set up just as like a normal, like you're going for the Trans America record.
Like, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's fascinating. And real quick, I wanted to talk to you again. I may cut this as part of another podcast, because I got a lot more Mike Rossi debate came up lately. Based on the podcast with Bart, and again the people who are still kind of hanging on and still desperately want this disqualification. Did you do any? Were you involved at all? Any writings on Mike Rossi or any of the investigation? And I'm sure you followed it, but were you involved in that at all from Runner's World standpoint?
Yeah. Yes, I was. That I guess that sort of launched the whole thing. We got a tip, as I think Let's Run did about that time, before it come out, and I did not write that article. I think it was a freelance writer of ours who wrote that article initially. And then that's just sort of been the running thread in my coverage, just sort of been the thing that launched our interest, or renewed our interest in marathon cheating. Had that never happened, I can't imagine my story about Boston cheaters that I worked on with you would have come out.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't have had the blog. Again,
exactly.
My whole thing was I'm like, yeah, are there no more cheaters to worry about, because we're spending 1,000 pages on Mike Rossi, and so I'm still kind of to that point. So so here we are, 5 years later, almost, and I still again, I think it's probably really just a couple people that care that desperately for a Mike Rossi disqualification. Whenever I write an article, I get the retweet and, hey, VIA Marathon, why aren't you disqualifying Mike Rossi? They don't care. It's still constant, and it's just really this obsession with Mike, which I argue isn't about his actual cheating, because again, we found how many more runners, 47 that cheated that same year. I found many serial cheaters who cheated more than Mike Rossi. It was because he's a jerk. So it's, does he deserve to be disqualified more because he's a jerk? So it's just, to me, it's
what they're trying to do is get him disqualified at that race way back in the day.
Yeah, they're trying to get him disqualified from the 2014 VIA Marathon. And that was the argument I had just
Hillary
last weekend.
Clinton, but at this point, what difference does it make?
Yeah, that's kind of my point exactly. Yes, it would be if they disqualified him. I'd say, hey, that yes, it's nice, but I mean, pretty much, you think Mike Rossi? What's the next word that comes to your mind? Either jerk or cheater, whatever. So it's like, people are like, oh well, it sends a message that you can get away with cheating. To me, he's gotten away with nothing. But
he doesn't seem to have gotten away with it.
Yeah, for us, it's. The story's concluded. As you said, there's a small group of runners who every now and then I'll see in my Twitter mentions as well, who are quite loud and strangely, in my opinion, still quite obsessed with the whole ordeal. But the only way the story would continue is if Mike ever wanted to come clean, and our interest, or my interest in that, wouldn't be like getting some sort of justice or whatever, or finally apologizing. It's more just like answering the why. Like, it's just an interesting part of the human condition.
Yeah. But is there a flip side to the why? And it makes me think of this when you're talking about the fact that now, years later, people are bothering both of you, upset about, worked up about, obsessed about this Mike Rossi story. Is there another kind of human interest story about the people that for whatever reason, are extremely bothered by this to this day and can't let it go. Like, who are those people?
So no, I totally agree. And actually, in our podcast that Runner's World came out with about the Boston Project, if you will, I interviewed, and I'm blanking on his name again. Sorry, because a couple of years ago we interviewed one of those people. Because I'm very curious about.
It was Tony. I think it was Tony, right?
It was Tony. Maybe there was one other.
The runner who Mike posted a picture of him when he was in the hospital.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yep. It was him. And yeah, so I was very curious about what sort of like, just feels like you can spend your free time being happier. Maybe just go run. And
I get told that all the time, kid. Hey, Derek, I was focusing on the negative, and I try to say, well, it's for the flip. It's for the flip side. So, So real quick, like with the Tony and with those people, it's obviously personal, and Tony's not the one who's been harping on that. But for the other guys, I'm like, well, I get it's personal with you because he made a comment. He said something about your kids, or he threatened you on, or you believe he threatened you on a Let's Run thread. So I understand it's personal, but as far as cheating goes, to me, he's one in hundreds. And so he said, well, it's not personal. I care about all cheaters. I said, no, you're only messaging me about Mike Rossi. So that's kind of argument. So I guess I kind of understand, people he attacked directly or maybe threatened directly, kind of wanting some kind of justice. But if you look at what's happened to him since then, it's hard to say that how much more he deserves or his family deserves, because it does leak into affecting his wife and his kids and whatnot. So.
And just to be clear, I'm not talking about Mr. Yeah, screw that guy. He's a cheater. That guy, I'm not talking to him. I'm talking about Mr. I'm emailing the Marathon Investigator or the Runner's World magazine 3 years later because this guy still hasn't been disqualified, and it's really bothered. Like, what's going on in that guy's world?
Yeah. I'd counter and just say I don't find it that interesting.
No,
there's a tiny group of people that are still upset about it.
I made the mistake of getting engaged, and then I realized, okay, I'm talking to two people, probably one person, because one's it was like Mike Rossi clown face is the avatar, and they're both arguing at me at the same exact time. So I'm thinking it's probably the same guy. Maybe not. Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm sure they know each other, but again, the one runner, he was involved in the beginning, and he was probably in the secret group and all that stuff too. But most of us at that point, again, just move on. I'd rather work on, helping the runners and dealing with stuff affecting 2019 and 20 Boston than looking back at Mike at this point. I just don't think it's as beneficial as the few people think. So. I'll get ripped on. I'll get ripped on for this too, and I'll get tweeted at and everything else. And so be it. That's it's my opinion, and that's I go with it. If all my followers disagree with me, then they'll stop clicking on my articles.
There's a level of obsession where you just back away and you say, and that person's a little bit crazy.
It's not just Mike. I mean, I've had some cases where I get an email. I mean, where I just start getting these obsessive emails about one particular runner, and then starts then you just know it's so much more. And just me personally having, I'm not a robot. I may write it like one. I may act like one at times. Like I don't have the emotion, but it's like, all right, this person is only contacting me because they have, something personal against this person, and this is their way to try to get back at them. And I'm not going to be manipulated knowingly. I'm not, when I see that coming, I'm going to back off in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Derek, seeing the evolution of your blog, you've become a much better journalist, is essentially what it comes down to. You've developed this set of ethics, and you can kind of read through people's BS and know what's a good story, what's not. And that has been kind of interesting from afar a little bit, as we haven't, worked as much together these past years, but sort of seeing what you choose to write about and what you don't.
Yeah, and like I think we talked about, because I finally did meet Kit at New York. When I was at the New York Marathon, we sat down, had a drink, and I said, hey, for the time being, anyhow, I'm doing this full time, and one of my struggles is hey, I got to write an article every day. It's like, well, I'm catching myself. I'm stopping myself from doing that because then I'll start reaching for content. And it's like, okay, well, I could write about this. I normally wouldn't, but I want to get something out. I haven't written in a couple days, and I need to pull myself back from just really trying to write stories only because I have more time now. So it's, so I definitely try to keep myself in check the best I can. Well, I think that's probably about it. Kit, I appreciate this one. This was a long one. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, sure.
And again, anything you ever need from me, and again, I always keep in touch for sure. And
absolutely, if there's any good stories, I always I always shoot
Derek. Shoot to you first.
Asking Derek if he has any interesting developments or stories to email me.
Yeah. If I ever get a hold of some of the, again, you've always been looking for. We always want to talk to the people who admit it, and I think you had your case. I had the one case, the woman that featured on the Today Show, who I still keep contact with, but there's so few and far between where they admit it and are open about it. So. And I think part of that is, and I was dealing with that, there was a runner, the Maud Gorman, she was the viral beauty queen contestant who got caught cheating in Ultra, and she admitted a while back she had apologized, and then she again admitted again what she did this week. But so I posted something on my thing, hey, it's nice to see somebody admit, and everyone's just ripping apart the admission. I'm like, if we don't accept these admissions when people do come clean, what's the motivation of people to come clean? So I may hit on that in some more detail, but
awesome.
Keep on going off on tangents. So again, thank you very much for your time. I'll make sure everyone knows that you're not supporting bandits, that Runner's World is not supporting banditing, and clear that up for us today.
Yeah, and I hope you don't get banned from the state of Hawaii here. So
yeah, I hope not either. Oh gosh, yeah. Never mind. I'm not going to tell you when I'm planning on going there, but yeah, I have an anniversary coming up, a 25th anniversary. So I'm not going to Honolulu. I will be on a different island. Okay. So yeah, good point.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Kit.
Thanks.
Okay, I think that was awesome and informative, and we have a lot of jumping off points in future podcasts. I think can kind of come from those topics. So
cool.
I think Kit was great and open. So definitely do appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
All right.
Yeah, if you ever want to do a article about the best running podcast, let me know. Miles.
Yeah, we've definitely. You guys are on our radar. So
awesome.
Yeah. Anyway, I will let you guys go. It's about my bedtime. So.
All right, Kit. Thank you.
Yeah. Talk later.
Bye. All right. Awesome. So.
Do you think we're really on his radar?
No, he had no idea who you are. No. It could be. It'd be awesome.
You never know whose radar you're on.
No, you don't. You are now. So yeah. So
yeah. Well, maybe. I mean, I know
Bart. Bart's Bart's your buddy now. We got Rudy. So yeah. So we're exposing you to, getting you some attention, and you're exposing me to your much larger podcast audience at this point. So
let me tell you something. You do not want to be too tight with those people because they're a little crazy. I think that one of the podcasting 101 things is that to have dedicated fans is everything. And I think that we may not be the most popular running podcast, but the people that are diehard 10 Junk Mile people, they will do anything for the show. They are invested. I have this thing where we open up packages. If you send us whatever you want to send us, we open it up and I give them my address.
I will not be doing that. There's no way in hell I'm doing that, Scott.
Oh, they'll send you some bad stuff. I have a stack of packages. I have 5 new packages just in the past week. People just send us just random stuff.
That's awesome. Hey, and if you want to send anything to Marathon Investigation, please send it to Scott. You can look at the bomb-sniffing dogs and everything else there. But yeah, I'm not putting my address out there, and I'm not telling people to send me packages.
Marathon Investigation, care of Scott Coomer, 20 South Clark Street, Suite 1620, Chicago, Illinois, 60603.
Awesome. Yeah, and send it, if it's for me, to send it to Pussy Boy.
Yeah.
Throw it back to the Bill episode if you haven't listened to it. Okay, great. So, Scott, what else you got going on? Tell us about your races and
That's about it. I still have, 10 junk miles is pumping. I'm doing an interview of Lisa Smith-Batchen. Lisa Smith-Batchen is a epic. She's like the queen of Badwater. She's a coach. She lives out in the Tetons. I got that on deck tomorrow. We have a bunch of shows coming out. We kind of pre-recorded for the rest of the year, and working overtime on the Badger Trail races. But it's interesting. I didn't know that being a race director would involve so much meeting with the police, the fire department, the mayor, the Chamber of Commerce, all of the people in all of the communities that the race goes through, trying to get them invested and excited about the race. We've been doing an awful lot of that because the Badger Trail races goes through a lot of small towns in southwest Wisconsin, and the economic impact of the races is ridiculous.
So I need to ask you, as far as, 100-mile trail race, do you have timing mats? Do you have something in place to... Are you thinking more than you would have about, potential cheating? You've been aware of some cases of cheating in, 100-mile races and whatnot. Are you, are you keeping that in the back of your mind?
I am. There's certainly a few people that I don't want to come. And I think that, I can look at the course and I could tell you where someone could cheat for sure. But on the other hand, I know every person that's going to be working at this race. And we know every inch of this race like the back of our hand. So, is it possible someone could cheat? Sure, but I think we're probably going to know. And the other thing is, and it's kind of like a thing that we're doing that most races don't do, is like our 100-mile race is flat, soft, and easy. There's no hills, there's no roots, there's no rocks. And we're giving you 36 hours to do it. So it's kind of, we're like looking at people that say, could never finish a 100-mile race and they really want to do one, this is the one to do.
Yeah,
or
so you're targeting me.
Sure. Well, I mean, you're like 8 miles, right? So you'd be
hang on here. And again, pretty much untrained, which I need to train. So since I haven't shown I can train, but I did manage. Oh gosh, I'm forgetting the miles. I'm going to overstate. I think I was 76 miles in the 24-hour. In the North Course 24. So I would think.
Okay.
So I would think 100 miles in 36 hours is doable.
If you were reasonably trained, a brisk walk would do.
Yep.
And you could certainly do it. The other thing is that, so like that, and then our 100K, we're giving 33 hours. So you could literally power hike 50K, sleep overnight, and then power hike back. So, but and it's not so much that we want it to be easy and accessible and all that. It's just that we realize there's a lot of older people that are, like 60, 70, 80 years old that love ultra running. Someone like Laz, let's say, that maybe couldn't finish a regular 100-miler within the 30-hour time slot. So we give you the 6 extra hours. Come get a buckle because, I'm going to be out there. So what difference does it make to me?
Yep. Yeah, and we need to talk. We mentioned on Twitter, I'm trying to get you to do the North Coast 24 with me to do the loop, so we can throw down a challenge to you. But
do you know what the date is of that already?
It's always like the last weekend of September, like September 22nd-ish. I'm not sure if that's what it was this last year. It might be slightly different this year. So yeah, I'll let you know. It's up in Cleveland. It's a national championship, so you get a lot of good runners out there. And if
it works for my schedule, I know I have the Yeti 100 at the end of September, but if it works for the schedule, I would certainly be up for it.
Yeah, they're just fun. I mean, I enjoy those more, and to me, they're easier than even marathons these days because you don't have to go fast; you just have to keep going. So
it would be fun just for all the trash talking.
Oh yeah, we'd be hounding you, making sure you don't stop off in the Porta John, skipping laps, pulling a Kelly Agnew. So.
All right.
So hey, we're just rambling on here. We've been going for a long time. So yeah, I think this was awesome. I love talking to Kit. Kit's one of my favorite people in the running industry, and I joke with him about the first question there, but obviously he's not for banditing. So make sure that's clear. So all right. So marathoninvestigation.com, 10junkmiles.com. Thank you for listening.
Become a Patreon.
Oh,
subscribe
yes, please do. I have bonus content that right now one person's going to hear. So, so please subscribe, and we'll start promoting that. And subscribe to Marathon Investigation on Patreon.
Tell a friend, and become a patron.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Marathon Investigation Podcast. Have a questionable result to report? Visit marathoninvestigation.com to contact us or email Derek at results@marathoninvestigation.com.
Another case closed for the Marathon's silent guardian.